Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another installment of Experts in Sustainability. Now, this episode, our guest, whenever I have a question on circular economy, circular supply chains, anything with circle in the name, I call Deborah Dole. Deborah, welcome. Welcome to our discussion.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
All right, can you start off by introducing yourself, talk about your company, and talk about the amazing things that you do?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really two areas that I engage with the circularity community, both, of course, related to supply chain, because supply chain is my favorite topic, inventory specifically, which I hope we have a chance to cover at some point today. So on the one hand, I engage personally throughout both the supply chain community and the circularity community, and sort of talk to both groups. I talk with the circularity people about, hey, have you talked to your supply chain? And they always kind of look at me and say, my who? And I say, who do you think is going to make all this happen? And I talk to the supply chain world, and so often we're caught surprised. And this is one time we have a chance to actually not be surprised as the world starts to shift towards more circular practices. So that's sort of one area that I focus on. The other that's grown quite organically, and we'll probably cover this, is called the Circular Supply Chain Network. This is really because there are supply chain professionals around the world who want to learn about what does circularity mean for supply chain? How can we help? What do we need to get done? And how do we learn to very quickly move into taking action together? Which will have huge impacts, of course, across the supply chain community. So love both of those topics. Super happy to be here and excited to delve into these with you.
Yeah, let's get into it then. So the two questions I ask everyone is, one, what's your definition of sustainability? And two, what are your top two SDGs?
It's harder than it, the top two SDGs is hard.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I'll give you my answer. But first, sustainability. So I always describe sustainability in three areas. This is pretty widely adopted, I think. There's certainly the sustainability from the environment. Fun fact, on the first time the term sustainability was used was actually from a guy in the mining industry who was trying to figure out how much timber can I use. He needed timber for his mining process. And he did the math to calculate how many trees from this population of trees can I take in order for the population to be unimpacted. So how do I keep the capital and only take what I can? And so that was the first time sustainability was actually used in terms of the environment. So that's probably what we're all very familiar with.
Can't find that one on Wikipedia. Continue.
Yeah. Thank you, Walter Stahel, in your tremendous book, which is where I found that little nugget. The second one, of course, is financial sustainability, which we talk about sometimes. My last role, a few roles ago, I worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, spent a ton of time in African countries. And when we talked about sustainability there, it really had to do with the financial sustainability of the organizations we worked with. So can you stand on your own 2 feet? Do you get external funding? Is the idea that you have financially viable into the future? So there's certainly a financial component there as well. And then, of course, we have the ethical pieces. The ethics in supply chain have started to become more transparent over the last, I'd say, 20, 30 years, especially as work was done in electronic supply chains and starting to understand what's happening in mining. That we start to see extended through different consumer products now, of course, and the transparency that's being demanded by consumers is starting to be there. So these three elements, I cast a broad net for the term sustainability. Circularity, I say, overlaps just two, the environmental piece and the financial piece, meaning how do we continue to fuel our global economy with resources that today come from inside the planet, but those are running out. So how do we actually switch our source? Now, by definition, a circular supply chain is shorter, more regional, more localized. I find as operations are kept closer to home, they're also often more ethical. However, I don't see the primary purpose of a circular economy to tackle ethics, but people do argue about this one.
All right. SDGs. You can't
SDGs.
deflect. You can't
Okay,
deflect.
here we go. Ready?
Let's
Okay.
go.
Number 9, infrastructure, industrialization. I don't think we talk enough about the importance of industry. If we think about waste production, we often talk about what comes out of municipalities, what comes out of people's homes, their kitchens, plastic straws, and so forth. But the waste produced in municipalities is often less than 30% of a given market. The rest is made up from industry and construction. Depending on how fast your country is growing, construction is a larger percentage of that. So industry really needs to get some love. You know, if you go over and flip a light switch on, you assume the lights will turn on. There's a supply chain behind that, an infrastructure behind that. When you want your internet to work, the cloud is a real physical place that uses energy and water and spare parts and supply chains. And so this piece to me is very important. This SDG also focuses on the smaller, I don't remember the term they use, but smaller infrastructure, smaller manufacturing facilities. We will be moving to a regional model, I'd say in the next 10 years, away from these big global centers of manufacturing. This will start to become more regional as we harvest, transform, and use materials more regionally. So quite excited about SDG 9. Okay. Now, unsurprisingly, probably my second one is SDG 10, equity. So if we're going to have a just transition to a circular economy, we have to start understanding what's causing inequities today. We could, without a doubt, transition to a circular economy in an unjust, uninclusive way. We've built this economy in a way that's not inclusive, so we could certainly do it again. However, there's a growing group of people focused on a just transition and what that means. So for example, more people in the world have access to toilets. No, more have access to cell phones than toilets. So if we start thinking about what does that mean for infrastructure, what does that mean for equity, for access to capital, for the ability to just buy a nicer item that will last longer? Well, that's not accessible for much of the world. So as we think about a global economy where everyone can participate, that is also circular, there's a lot of firsts for us to tackle as a global community. So if we put 9 and 10 together, we just about get to a just transition to a circular economy.
See, you caught me by surprise there. Okay, I thought you were going to say 12.
I know. I thought I would keep you guessing,
right?
And keep you on your toes.
You got me. You got me on that one. You got me on that one. That's for sure. All right. So thank you for that. So let's get into this inventory piece. Knowing we're probably going to run out of time after we talk about that. So, but let's go ahead and talk about inventory. And I want you to frame it like the apparel and fashion industry.
I love this. Okay, so number 1, most important, everything is inventory.
Yes.
So just start thinking that way. Today, sadly, once an item crosses a point of sale, it's not really inventory as we define it today. It's like trash waiting to be sent to landfill. Bear with me as I take this through this, right? So everything you see around your house right now, maybe there's a few things that could be recycled. Our recycling economy in the United States is not terribly mature. We've been trying to do this for a long time and it's not really working. But for the most part, the majority of what's around in today's infrastructure is probably going to end up in a landfill or in an ocean at some point. So how do we start changing our mindset and consider that every operation, every room in the world today is now the source of raw materials for another operation? This starts to get the heart of circularity, of course. So as a supply chain planner, I have to think about, where will my feedstock come from? Where will my raw materials come from? Who's my customer of my operation? What type of inventory do they need from me? So if we think about everything sort of as a work in progress piece of inventory, or sort of an asset that has value, will be used over and over and over again, we start to redefine what is inventory, how do we manage it, how do we predict it, how do we classify it? Is all paper waste made equal? No, but we can't go down to an individual unit level. So as we think about the world, I see the world in, we say rose-colored glasses. Mine is an inventory-colored glasses. I see the world in inventory terms.
What color is that? What color is that? Is that like a blend or
the color of joy, Justin? It's so lovely. But really, I can't help it. You go to back pre-COVID days, you go to a sporting event, everything is inventory, including humans. We see a restaurant, tables are inventory. They're wanting to turn things over. Mm-hmm. So we think about how quickly or how slowly inventory will start to turn under a circular economy, whether we call it a circular economy or not. We're going in this direction. That turns will no longer be king. And I think often today all right, we talked about rose-colored glasses. We talked about inventory-colored glasses. I see the world in inventory terms. I considered trying to write a paper or book on this, but I don't know how many people would actually read it. I would read it. So
I would. Yes, I'd make my students read it. All right, there you go.
Okay, there's like what, 30, 60 people.
Yeah, you got 30. You got 30. I got two sections. You got 60 people.
Okay, I'll write it down. But here's the deal. I feel that these last, let's call it 100 years, at least a good 50 years as we started thinking about lean applied to our business operations, which has done so much good and I think is actually the basis of circular thinking. The idea has always been to increase inventory turns. How much quicker can we turn items through the system? If something's gathering dust, that means your supply chain is unhealthy. You need to figure out how to get it to turn faster. Now, the problem is, as we move away from consumption-based economy models where everybody is using, and we move away from inventory and items with planned obsolescence built in so that it's breaking on us, so that we have to buy something new. If we move away from this model and into a model of use and reuse and sharing, we won't be building as much new items, as many new items. So now we're going to move away. We'll still look at inventory turns, but higher may not always be better. I predict that we'll start to have a better understanding of actual need of use in the marketplace. I predict we'll start to align material harvesting, which today we call mining, or getting oil out of the planet. In the future would be more around harvesting material out of a current ecosystem, potentially getting to landfill by 2050. I'm gonna put a number out there. Mm-hmm. And we need to align those. Let's not push more material into economy than what's actually used, because that's what's driving a lot of the consumption that we see today. So inventory, wildly fascinating, and really is the basis of this. The way we manage inventory will fundamentally change, and there's inventory in every supply chain. I actually wrote my master's thesis on the digital supply chain for digital goods, not a digitally enabled supply chain, but looking at Kindle books, Netflix movies, and these digital goods, and looking at the idea of digital inventory turns. And I find that as we think about, how the internet functions, and, okay, people who actually run the internet don't argue with me. Supply chain professionals and the way that we look at processes and value stream mapping, for example, can be applied to digital turns and digital inventory management, but it does take a shift. And so this underpinning of every supply chain we have has to universally change our language, change our standards, and change our measurements. And this is going to be a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Yeah. So whenever you said that, everything has inventory, I read a book called The Upcycle. Have you seen it? McDonald and Brungart, yep. And they kind of drive home the point in that, everything has nutrients, right? So whenever you reach the end of life, you need to return those nutrients back to the source, if you will. Right. So I think that, that's one thing I think about when we refer to inventory, in that, how do we send those nutrients back? Because they even mentioned that, your iPhone, or if you're a Samsung person, your smartphone, let me politically correct, your smartphone has nutrients. So whenever your smartphone reaches end of life, you can go and Apple or Samsung can retrieve all of those precious metals and all of the motherboards and the cameras and things like that, and reuse those. So that's where we're trying to go in terms of inventory. And I think we can do the same thing. In fact, I think that we're seeing that with Levi's. you know, and things like that. And we've seen the Patagonia doing things like that. So, you know, we're exploring, you know, this couture type fashion and how we can upcycle and create nutrients within that as well. So do you have any thoughts and insight on that?
I sure do. And I will say I am a very happy Rent the Runway customer.
Okay.
And that type of a model is very interesting to me. These last couple of months, I have actually been a digital nomad across the United States, very safely, very distant, small towns.
What does that mean?
Means I take my whole entire office fits into my backpack, and I routinely move to a different four walls to try to stay sane during these very interesting few months. But what I've learned in that is I've actually built a capsule wardrobe, which is the idea of not having very many items that all can work together. And let's be honest, only my partner is seeing me during these times anyway, and he's gotten used to the fact that it's a sweatpants year. However, if you think about a few pairs of bottoms, a few pairs of tops, a couple of sweaters, and that's your core staples closet, and then you can supplement with something like a service from Rent the Runway that allows you to have that coat you're only going to really wear once a year, the dress you have to go out and have a really special dinner, but you want to have something else. And I think there's a way to create an economy around still having fun, but that you don't need to continuously change out. So as an example, this jacket I'm wearing right now is from Rent the Runway. And everything is inventory. As their inventory is used lovingly and getting towards the end of its life, they actually offer it for sale to their members. So once you rent something, you can buy it. And I was able to buy this at maybe 20% of the original price. And it's had lots of different owners. But once you get something, you think, wow, I'm actually going to wear this quite a bit. Because the goal should be to turn up utilization of each individual product so that we don't have all this non-value added material just lying around our economy when it could be producing value and people could be paying for that. So instead of a single pair of jeans, maybe that's $100 and you have 10 pairs of jeans in your closet. Okay, we're talking about $1,000 sitting there, but you really only wear one pair. So those other jeans could also be part of these swapping programs. And I think driving up the utilization during the life. So we talk a lot about modular products to take apart easily at the end of their life, but I think we need to remember the first focus is to leave an item as itself for as long as possible.
Right.
Before we upcycle, before you add anything else to it, before you take anything away, leave it as itself and see how many people can use it over the course of its life. And I think fashion has such potential to really go far in that. And we're also seeing Rent the Runway expanded to homewares, you know, like pillows for your couch and throws so that you can change that out and change your color scheme, but also not have to be buying brand new. So I predict we'll be moving into this type of a sharing economy more in a consumer space. Cars, that's already happening in metropolitan areas. So you can be dressed in clothes you're renting that you're happy about renting because that's how much value it adds to you. Maybe this outfit does add $27 of value to your life, even though it's a very expensive piece of clothing, and then you can send it back again. So I think this sharing economy is where we're headed. If we think, for example, of the tiny house movement, it's similar, that people are realizing that they actually don't need very much in their core staples, and they can go rent a big Airbnb for a weekend if they really want a big house experience. And so I think fashion is such a lovely place to start because everybody wears clothes.
Right.
So it's quite a unifying item.
Yeah. And you took my bullet about the sharing economy. I was gonna say that and sound smart, but you hit it. Do
you want to say it and just edit out the other part?
No, too late. Well, I think I really do think that that's where we're going. I mean, I think that, you know, Airbnb and Uber and Lyft kind of not really made it cool, but they validated the model and the approach.
Yep.
And the we are entering into, you know, the apparel industry, the fashion industry with Rent the Runway. But you bring up a good point in this this interior design space, that was a very interesting one. Because now, because now it's like, huh? Wait, huh? Like drapes, drapes, that makes sense. You know, pillows. I don't know,
we need to
but
come up with a good process for pillows, because there's a lot
sanitary
of stuff in there.
Exactly.
Y'all should be changing your pillow every 6 months anyway. Just Google it. Trust us.
Yeah, but like drapes, I could really see that.
Totally.
So,
and I think we're seeing, modular carpet companies who are being very successful. So if you have an area of your carpet you need to be replaced, you can just replace that one tile, but it doesn't look like a tile as you walk on top. Very similarly, it would allow the ability to change out your carpets in a way that is more shareable among households. So you're not ripping something out, but you're exchanging. And so I think this world, if I take fashion off for a second and call it broadly textiles, the land of textiles is complex. The supply chains are long, mile wide. They're much more complex, I think, than, well, people are starting to become more aware of the complexity of the dyes and the source materials and what we make materials out of and what we use them for and so forth. But the idea of applying sharing, I think, starts to become more understandable as it becomes more normalized, and the idea that we can in fact clean things between uses. And I think the comfort level, even in a post-COVID world, will certainly return quickly as people are able to reduce their kind of core, I'm going to talk about inventory again, your core working inventory in your life. How do you bring that down to a level that's manageable, affordable? But then also you can supplement it. So you can have a good time, and you can have a good life, and you can have rent a really fun car for a weekend, but you don't have to own one, because otherwise it just kind of sits there. And you don't want, the whole point here, of course, is we want to be able to monetize an individual item or material as many times as we can in its life. And that's the underlying underpinnings of the circular economy, of course, is we're saying, my word, there is 100 billion tons of materials enter the global economy every year, but they're not used very much. And so even if we could get everything to be used twice, that doubles the amount of economic value those materials are adding. That's such a good job creator. And I'm not sure a country in the world that doesn't need more jobs right now. So, So I think it's quite an interesting space of how do we drive up utilization? We do that through a sharing economy. And I really think that's the first step. Of course, after we lean out in operation, the first step in a business model is to see if you can have a sharing model as well.
Okay. And so you bring up something very important to me. As much as you like inventory, I like that term supply chain. All over is broad. I like it. I like it a lot. So could you expand on the importance of business partner relationships, visibility, most importantly, visibility, and collaboration within that textile supply chain?
Absolutely. I think, visibility often brings us to data. They're not the same thing. They're related. You got to have the data by itself means nothing if it's not put in some sort of structure to get you to visibility. But, not very many years ago, data was considered the quote unquote next oil. I disagree with that. I think data will become table stakes to play in the global economy. We're starting to see more supply chains have data requirements in their sourcing contracts. I think this will catch on very rapidly in the next few years. And I think what we have learned, especially this year in the middle of COVID disruptions, is that data sharing becomes a requirement for all parties to be able to truly be successful. It is not something that the default trading partner will try to use to exploit you. And I think that's been traditionally the fear. So I think there's ways we can share data that is secure and intentional, but we have to share it. As we start thinking about the pressure that consumers are putting on supply chains for where did you come from, who made you, how long is your supply chain? As we start thinking about material risk and source material not being as available anymore, which often applies more to metals, but we could certainly see applying to textile inputs as well. As we start thinking about supply chain disruption risk. So if an item crosses a border, it got stuck this year at some point. And so we start wondering, how can I shorten up my supply chain, which then reduces the risk of disruption and also happily pulls you into a more circular business model. So as we think about these types of trading partner agreements, as we shift into the world of a more robust ecosystem under circularity, and if you think about this, again, as I said earlier, every operation becomes an input of raw materials, the commodities market starts to become quite dynamic, and you may not have the same type of strategic sourcing relationships that you have today. Your inputs may come from a wide variety of operations, and it's unlikely that you'll hold strategic relationships and contracts with these trading partners. And this is the role of a technology that will look something similar to blockchain. I'm not 100% sold on blockchain, but if we had to do it today, it's the best technology we have. So I know you're wagging your finger at me. I'm going to just give me a second, and then you can tell me how great it is or how bad it is. I don't know which one you're going to go with. However, if we think about the need to share data and money among parties who do not have a signed contract, blockchain is a tremendous tool for that. And I think that's where we're going for sourcing. And so if I think about textiles, who knows where your cotton is going to come from?
Right.
Today, we solve the problem by putting several middlemen in the middle, which of course erodes all the margins for everybody in the supply chain, of course. But there's a way that we can start to have more of an open market actually in a circular economy that allows for these dynamic sources of materials to be paired to operations. But again, they have to have a contract mechanism to solve for that. Please, Justin, tell me your thoughts on blockchain.
No, so no, I agree with you. I agree with you because the more business partners that are added to the network, the more complex, and then the more you have to hide, in my opinion. And I think that's the current issue we have with blockchain. That's the current issue we have within the supply chain discipline as a whole. You know, and that's why that's why I asked you the question of visibility. You know, why do you think? And that's why I asked why in your view, you know, why is visibility important to an organization's operation? Regardless of if it's in the fashion industry or regardless of whatever industry it is. So whenever you are developing an initiative, what is important from a project team perspective? What is important from an organizational culture perspective?
Both really good questions. It's interesting. I've done a lot of thinking on this lately, and I prioritize culture every time. There are lots of very capable people in the world. There are 44 million supply chain professionals in the United States. Well, I'll restate, there are 44 million jobs tied to supply chain in the United States. Would we classify them all as supply chain professionals? Maybe not. But we have a lot of us around the world. What can be difficult is having a team dynamic and chemistry built in a way that can truly be a high-performing team. In my case, the Circular Supply Chain Network, it's actually quite interesting because like I mentioned, it happened very organically. And so actually all of my team members found me. And because we're so new and organic and community driven, if somebody wants to add value, fantastic. Then the challenge becomes, how do we manage scope, timeline, roles and responsibilities, team communication, kind of democratizing the project plan in a way that doesn't rely on a single project leader. And I think, especially now that everybody has been forced to be virtual, I think we will start to actually adopt more structure in our project plans and the way that we manage our projects. So where it used to be, perhaps you had one central PMO, maybe you were kind of old school and you had your targets on a wall with sticky notes, and it made it super easy to stay aligned with your team because you were all there in person. Mm-hmm. Now we start thinking about the future, which frankly, I think in the next 5 years, we're going to start realizing that the whole world's labor market is available to us. And if mm-hmm. we can properly manage a virtual team, there's a good chance your team will never get together in person. And I think there's something quite lovely to that, because we're excluding so much of the world's thinkers right now with the way that we set up our labor markets, of course. However, point is, there are tremendous tools in the next year, I predict they'll even get better, that allow for multiple people to be moving little virtual sticky notes around together and be adding to a board. We use Trello on my team to have our little to-do items that we can move around. And so having this type of no longer reliance on a single project manager or lead, right, I think is pretty powerful. And also, of course, reduces risk to your project because more people have the information and can understand how items are attached to each other.
Mm-hmm. Now, you make a interesting point in that we talked about the sharing economy, and with the virtual world we're moving to, do you think that we'll be able to, just how we have, we're essentially ride sharing, we're home sharing, do you think we're going to be employee sharing?
Yeah, that's a gig economy, right?
Yeah. No, I'm talking about I'm employed. I'm a W-2 employee from one organization, and then I'll go to this other company.
Yes, I do. Yeah. And that's what I think we're doing that now. If you are an employer and you have had a consultant come spend time with you, in reality, you're employee sharing. If you yourself have more than one source of income, you're engaging in employee sharing. I think it could be shifted more structure in a more organized manner, which I think is what you're getting at, meaning, especially in the United States, who pays my health insurance is often a big item. But for the rest of the world, the government pays their health insurance, and that's not as much of a factor. But I do think that location will start to become quite dynamic. I think our employment laws and taxes will start to become different. And I think people will have more ability to both pay their bills and do what they care about in a way that feels more equal to them. Where today it sort of feels like, okay, I need to pay my bills, I need to put in a 10-hour workday, and then in a few hours in the evening, I can do what I really care about. Mm-hmm. But I think we'll start to create a structure where you can do both in a way that feels more like 50-50, which I think is really interesting, or even work on 3, 4, 5 different projects at once. And this, again, coming back to a project management perspective, we're exploring how do we, as different volunteers come out of the woodwork, how do we structure our to-do items in a way that are small, maybe 5-hour scopes that can be done synchronously or asynchronously as people have time. And so this way of planning a project is quite complicated, but could be really quite successful, so that if it's not on critical path, for example, get the work done as it gets done. And if it becomes on critical path, then we can give it more oversight. Very similarly, I think the labor market will shift our ability to work for multiple organizations. And maybe in the same way, it's a 20-hour scope, it's a 100-hour scope, it's a 6-month scope. But I think this idea of an organization deciding that you have to be fully dedicated means a lot of different things to different people. So I think we will see some changes in moonlighting policies, some changes in perceived conflicts of interest. I think all of that will start to be tackled in years to come as organizations, as individuals start to engage on their own more rather than on behalf of their company. And that's certainly, my case, is that I get to talk about my opinions on circularity as myself, as an individual human being. And I think there's something really cool to be valued as individuals and moving away from being valued for who you're currently working for.
All right. And one thing I forgot to ask you probably like 30 minutes ago is to tell us more about the circular supply chain network.
Yeah.
How rude of me.
It's not rude. It's just such a lovely group of strangers who met on the internet. So we are, a series of conversations occurred these last several months of people really looking for resources to learn more about the circular supply chain. What is it? What's the concept? How do I do it? What does it mean? Can I start now? And that doesn't exist. I can send them to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website to learn a lot about circularity. There are pretty okay resources to figure out what is supply chain, but we don't really have depth. We have a few consultant level, 100,000-foot view. So there was a need for this type of learning resources in some manner. We also have seen the desire for connection among professionals. I know we see a lot of woes about Zoom fatigue, but I find the people I talk to on Zoom are not fatigued. They're quite excited and they want to be in small groups and they want to engage and they want to hang out.
Yeah.
You know, and we have 4 or 5 continents represented when we have community roundtable events, and people love that they can be put into a random breakout and they've got people from all over the world that they otherwise very likely wouldn't have met. I find this virtual world to be more inclusive than we have seen in the past. If we think about the types of people who are able to access global international conferences, is only a subset of the population. And so as we're able to have more access to these types of forums and convenings, the types of ideas and conversations coming out are truly remarkable. So we have 3 real goals. 1, people really want to learn. So we're starting to figure out what exactly do they want to learn about, which format do they want to learn in. And we're planning to have some sort of a learning hub launched in the first half of next year, hopefully sooner than later, because we get a lot of questions and people really want to connect. So of course we started with Zoom for now. We're also looking at how to make those more structured so that we have some that are webinar meant for, you know, information dissemination, and a series of roundtables, which people really love, in order to engage more deeply in conversations with their people. You know, the coolest part about this is we have people from all around the world who actually get to nerd out with supply chain professionals on a level that, you know, other people in your life don't understand. Like the fact that you would read my book on inventory is a huge deal.
Right.
You get to connect these people. And then what we're finding with this generation, and what I'm saying this generation I call younger millennials and the older Gen Z, is we don't often find learning for learning's sake. We often find learning for a purpose, connecting for a purpose. Why should I learn this item? Oh, because I can go and make a difference in the world. And as we think about the role that supply chain plays in the world, ethically, environmentally, it's massive. I mean, everything is inventory. So if we can change the way we do inventory to be the right way, we've really got ourselves a very impactful position. And so that's the other element we're thinking about, is how do we take action as a community? What type of action do people want to take? I'm really excited about what's possible with connecting professionals around the world virtually. This shove into the digital world for much of the world needed to happen so that they have more access to thinkers around the world. So for example, I spent almost 4 years in international development, and it was very much an in-person type of discussion. Use of even phone calls was very low. Use of Zoom was very low. Now, the same governments that I flew in person to these countries to have conversations with, they're now holding cabinet meetings on Zoom, all from their own homes. And so they've been thrust into this world, which then means they have access to anyone who they want to talk to. Before, it was a tougher discussion about who could we bring in to be a subject matter expert to advise on a certain project. And now we certainly still have you know, a language between public and private sector. We still have to figure out the nomenclature, but the potential for doing good in the world, I am incredibly optimistic about what's possible.
Excellent.
So those are our 3 goals. We have a small group of half a dozen of us volunteers, and just a really fun group of people get together on a regular basis to swap ideas and muse about what we can do to make the world a better place.
All right. Changing the world one day at a time, right?
Woohoo! With inventory.
With inventory. So I would say that. So the last question I have is, with someone that's just wanting to start, I want to implement a circular supply chain. I want to get into more into this circularity. I want to take steps toward sustainable practices within my organization. In your opinion, how do they start?
Cool. So I'm going to make it simple, but it's really hard. People argue with me when I say this, but bear with me. All right. The supply chain is the gatekeeper for every material and resource in the economy today.
Mm-hmm.
It's ours. So if every material and resource that entered every supply chain in the world came from a secondary or renewable source, we'd be in a circular economy. That's it. That's as hard as it gets. Now, of course, it is really hard because there's material scientists and design and designers and policy and lots of things that need to change. But if we take this mindset, then an interesting place for people to start is go figure out what's entering your supply chain and where it comes from. And I mean anywhere. So I recently had a discussion with a gal at Microsoft. She gets to lead their digital sustainability work. And as we've talked about, the internet's a real physical place. And so it's like, okay, figure out who's your cloud provider, figure out where they get their energy from, figure out that footprint. So regardless of the area of supply chain you work in, there are inputs and there are outputs. Good old-fashioned SIPOC, and you can see what's coming in and what's going out. So after you figure out everything that enters, I mean water, energy, consumables, supplier packaging, anything that comes into that process, and then figure out what goes out. And I bet you there's a gap between what comes in, your ability to measure it, and what goes out. And that gap is the place to start, is understanding even where are my value leaks and where is material going and running around freely in the world where really it needs to be adding value to our economy. So I'd say first place to start is, learn about where items are coming, where their suppliers are being supplied from. Is it truly a secondary resource? How many miles did that item go? And then you can start to look at your BOM and understand in your product, how many miles have your components traveled? How circular is that specific product or operation? If you're in a services supply chain, you can do the same thing based off of the materials and resources coming into your supply chain. So it's really hard to do, really easy to say, but that's where I would recommend people start.
All right. So Deborah, it's been a blast. Been a blast learning about inventory, but I don't know what else we talked about. We just talked about inventory. Hey, but seriously, it's been an honor. I always love having the conversation with you. So where can people find you?
Perfect. Come and join us on circularsupplychain.network. We're also certainly on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and my personal website is circularnomad.com, and that has a ton of resources on circular supply chains.
All right, everyone. This is Deborah Dole. And again, circular nomad, circular economy, circular supply chain, anything circular. That's her. All right. Signing off. Thanks, Deborah.
Thank you. Oh, the questions I'm going to get on.